So last night I've heard a lot of people saying they really wish there were more talks about S. So with Hannes, we agreed next year we do a conference all about S, no more of the other topics. Right, so revisiting Old Chinese, S, TS, KS, and I'm mainly using Han material as the evidence to structure the conversation. Right, so everybody already talked about how the development of STS, etc. works. So Rodrigo hypothesizes it, then Pouilly-Blanc gives some examples like from Indic languages and says it disappears in the 4th century in the north and early 6th century in the south. I'm not studying that period, but this is just to calibrate a bit expectations. In Baxter 92, there's this nice set of rules that say basically KS goes to S already by the time of the Shījīng, PS goes to TS long before, and finally there's a TS goes to JS goes to J and qùshēng a bit later. And then in Baxter Sagart 2014, there's this quote that explains how we choose to reconstruct TS or not, and it's we reconstruct it in words that have Middle Chinese reflexes like IJS, but have etymological or graphical connections with words in it. So I take this as the starting point, and then I want to explore, like, can we use all the data to just decide when to put S and TS. So I will look at Han Chinese, Han Buddhist translations, and then at rhyme material and do some case studies after. So we have this corpus that's, my name is on it, but I just do a recompilation of Koblin and later materials that have accrued to the corpus. And it's all of the known transcriptions of Buddhist words in Chinese text from the Han period. So mainly Han Shega, Lokakshema, and Kang Mongxiang. And then for each word, so we assume that the language, the source language is Gandhari. I'm not going to discuss why, but you know, if you want, reach out to me afterwards. And for each, I look, taking the old Chinese reconstruction from Baxter Sagart, does the S appear in the word that is supposed to be transcribing? And so I do a tally by vowel S, JS, which usually will be close, WS, RS, S is missing here, but all right, PSTS together, and then KS. We don't have NS or NS in the corpus, so that's why they're not showing here. And what we see is unsurprising, is that the S seems to have disappeared by the time of that Eastern Han corpus, except in so PSTS, where we have 20 examples of positive, like we see an S that correspond to the PS of the Chinese, and one weird example here that I don't think I really discussed, but and we see a lot of negative, and we'll try to see why. So digging a bit into the PS and TS and breaking it down by vowel, we see that. So now I simplify PSTS to just TS, and that's what it means. For all vowels that are attested, we get a positive result. There's a bit of noise for the ATS that I won't discuss today. A big weird thing where it's look like a negative, and for us, we don't really have conclusive, or it's difficult to decide because usually these characters, they also have another pronunciation. So if a character has two pronunciation, you don't know which one was chosen to write at the time of the transcription. So impossible to say whether it's transcribed. Or at least we can't say it's a negative. If there was a positive, we would say that's a positive, but if it's a negative, there's a hesitation in the pronunciation, I can only say something different. Right, so this tells us there seems to have been an S still in that corpus, 4 syllables that come from TS, not for syllables that come from, that didn't have TS in Old Chinese. And we have this gap with its, that's mainly the character li, xuan li, the li, and that I'll talk about later in the talk. Now we look, I move to, so this I have a paper that's semi-accepted on this, so I can refer you to it later if you're interested. Now moving on to Han rhyme material. So this is mainly based on the Luo and Zhou book, but there's also transcription from other people like Yuan Lan. And this has been nicely collected on a website by a person called Suzuki, I forgot his full name, that we scraped. And I use this corpus of rhyme material both to investigate manually characters, like what do they rhyme with, etc., and also automatically using community detection algorithms. So the nice graphs you see on the handout come from this automatic detection. And then I look at 3 characters that I found interesting, and we'll see what we can do with them. And some of them will look like things that have been discussed in the yesterday. So looking at Hui or Quiz, perhaps. This is one of the few irregular rhymes in the Shījīng in terms of TS rhyming with a non-TS. So it rhymes in 2 odes, both of which exhibit some T. I don't know how to explain the absence of S here, but I'm going to just live with it and same here. So in both poems, it looks like we have a TS sequence, and this IJS is maybe problematic. So turning to the Han corpus, I'm not listing all the poems, but it occurs in quite a few poems, and it always rhymes with either TS or UTS, which maybe is interesting for people who care about the labial here, and with some schwa. And finally, it's also rhyming with this one that I'll discuss later, the hui. So in the Han corpus, rhyme corpus, it always rhymes with TS. There's no exception really at all. Initiation series, so this is the root of the series, or it looks like it. We also have this character that's reconstructed with TS, and that rhymes in TS everywhere in the Shījīng and in the rhyme material, in the Han material. So just looking at this, I want to put a T in there. So the rhyme behavior tells us the Shījīng series is coherent, and so I would reconstruct this replacing the J with a T in bracket, because it might come from something else, okay, or something, but that's the evidence that we have. Right, so that's a simple little case, and now we look at 2 characters, Kui and Kui, I think, I'm not sure anymore. So box and to break through an embankment. So both characters are reconstructed with JS, and I think in general, so is the entire Shījīng series for that character. This was mentioned yesterday by John, and I think I've seen it appear on the slides of Lindia. So in the Shījīng, it rhymes, Kui box rhymes once with roots, and Kui rhymes with something that, I don't know, is not reconstructed in Baxter and Sagart, but I would assume is a roots from the phonetic component, and or something like this, at least a TS, and with cuts. So it starts looking like there might be a T. Now, if we turn to the Han evidence, these characters are used all over the place, and they rhyme with a very long list that I didn't bother writing here, but 21 different characters in uts or uts. Also rhyme with that character of the same Shījīng series that is not reconstructed, but interesting, that maybe tells us some stuff about this series with quits, but this has a labial, and then some little anomalies, but that I won't discuss. How about the Shījīng series? So the root of the series is this qùs also with J in the Baxter Sagart reconstruction, but it rhymes exclusively with TS. There's no exception for this one in the Han material, and it's not in rhyme position in the Shījīng. So it looks like there would be a T as well for this character. Right, so the rhyming behavior is consistent in the Zhou and the Han. The Shījīng series, if we accept Gui to be quds, make the thing coherent. And so I would reconstruct a T in groups, and the other would be quds or something like this. Right, but yesterday we've seen that there were some problems with that Shījīng series, and this is where you have a page in the handout that might still be too small to look at. But essentially, what I'm showing here is I take all the characters from that Shījīng series, and I look at what do they rhyme with in the Han corpus. And then I make a graph of it. The character from the series, they're in those square boxes, and the things they rhyme with are in the circle boxes. It's very small, difficult to read, but what we see is that we have two big clusters that don't touch. Suddenly the word for how you call this in a graph escapes me, but there's no link between these two parts. And here, okay, so in blue, we have things that rhyme in œil, pingsheng, therefore, with this character. In green here, we have some œil, oui, so all based on the reconstruction. I'm not going to check all of these. And above, so this is where we have the E that we see here. So the one that was considered problematic is in that cluster of œil and e. And most of the other characters of the Shījīng series are found here. So the que box is here in that brown thing, that's all the rhyme are in uts. The other breaking the embankment is in that red thing, that's and they connect. I don't know if we can see, you see these gray lines that show connections between things that are not in the same community. The coloring is done by this algorithm that does community detection. So we put into a graph everything that rhymes together in any poem, and then we say now infer things that seem to really belong together. So it removes the noise a bit. And so links that are in the color of the node show things that are really occurring very often together, and the gray nodes are a bit less frequent, but they do occur. Overall, what we see is that this entire blob of brown, red, yellow, pink, orange, etc., all of them rhyme predominantly in TS. We have a little IJS cluster here, but I think there is evidence for putting a T in the number 2R. We have some Burmese cur that seem to match, and also the rhyming evidence and all the considerations make me think. So it's possible that the Gui series is 2 series when we see that, because we have 2 completely contradicting behavior, and we would not normally expect that otherwise. If we look at bronzes and manuscripts, so there's the first 3 lines of characters, we see that Gui and, I'm sorry, I didn't learn the pronunciation of the second one, but someone will tell me, maybe, Gui, have a very different shape, especially that part at the top. That I don't know what it looks like, but let's say a lure with a boo on top that we find here as well. But this is not the shape at all that we get here, where we get these 2 hands holding something that looks like that. So I reached out to Tinchi and I said, hey, is there 2 series? And she said, yes, there are several papers that argue precisely that these are 2 series, but from paleographic mainly point of view. And I think now the paleographic evidence matches very well with the rhyming evidence, and I would say therefore this series needs to be split in 2. And for que, and que, we can reconstruct a TS. And I would say for all the ones that we've seen in the upper part of that graph that we had earlier. The rhyming behavior is consistent. The Shījīng series is consistent now that we've excluded E and this other character that was at the bottom. And we also, once we put a T in there, there's a nice cognate in written Burmese, krut for box. And there's a nice correspondence, like it seems Western Burmese. K would come from a G, and so we have really groot and krus. So this looks appealing to me. E might need a new reconstruction. It doesn't have uts as an ending. Now that it's in a different series, then it's not tied to the constraint of having a homo-organic initial with the rest of the series. And I will let you reconstruct it when you want. Right, so that was for que. So we've seen two examples so far where the approach seems to work, and essentially is to say, if it rhymes with TS, then I assume it's TS. And in my experience, I'm not going to show all the examples where I've seen these, but most of the, well, a lot of the U's, if you look, you will find a T. Right, so there's a little problem with this. So this graph is going, I'm sorry, there is kind of no way to make these graphs readable at a detailed level. The goal is to get an impressionistic picture of it. So I take all characters, again, in the Baxter Sagart reconstruction. I didn't update the reconstruction based on the previous slides, that have either E or U, and then J, P, T, or K, and then an S, right? So that would mean uis, oops, uts, ux, is, ips, its, x, right? And I say, okay, put all of these, see when they rhyme together, and what is happening here. So, and then I've labeled roughly by hand. So we have all the hoods here, maybe some hits. Then we have an area that looks like it's the T. So often we have characters that have the pronunciation ut and also just ut. So they will end up being here. So there's contact with C, contact with K, with P. We have this area with E and E that's very nicely delimited, except for this sort of transition zone, which is where the problems really arrive. So in the previous slide, when we looked at the que Shījīng series, we've seen there were two components that were not connected at all. And that's what we used to say, look, they are really completely different. Here we have this transition zone, and that bothers me. And so I'm going to look specifically at the character li, because in the Han data, in the Buddhist transcription data, the negative we've seen for its never writing an S, or nearly never, were always because of this character li. So I want to understand what's going on with it. Right. In the Baxter Sagart reconstruction, it's some pre-initial and then ritz. In the Han Chinese Buddhist transcription, it always transcribed the syllable ri or li. And this is just a short list of all the words that I can transcribe. Anytime you have the Sanskrit shri, which in Gandhari would be shiri, we get these two characters, shi and li. And then we also have maha, na, ma, kolia, so ko and li. So in Gandhari, the kind of a that got reduced to a schwa at the end tends to disappear. There's a paper by Wallet that you can refer to. And we see it in more words. So Kshatriya, Vaishali, Kolia, Amrapali, right. So in all of these words, we see that ri writes li. But all the other characters that came from TS in Old Chinese, they do write an S in the transcription. So that's an anomaly. That's one of a very tiny group of anomaly. And here for li, we have so many examples that it's not fluke. It's it's how it was clearly pronounced in the dialect that was the source, the receiver of the transcription. Right. We also have these cases where, so like Palika, Pundarika, Spatika, Pundarika. These in Gandhari, they're reconstructed with by vowels as having this the and the vowel then drops. And so you could say, well, and maybe that appeared in John's data, I'm not sure anymore, but like if you see this, you would say, well, maybe Li has really a sort of fricative at the end, because then here you could argue it's encoding Pali or something like this. So it would fit very nicely with having an H, I would think. But looking at the entire extant and transcribed Gandhari corpus, we find that the Sanskrit ika, that suffix, specifically was always reduced to just a e. So actually the reconstruction of pronunciation by bounds, palika, etc., they seem to represent either an earlier stage of Gandhari or possibly be wrong in some way. And we have a paper that's been accepted. And so I take it that this proof is correct. So even in those cases that could be used as an objection, actually that was open syllable. And so in these words, li, still write the syllable li. Right, so the entire Buddhist transcription corpus tells us li writes li, and therefore it probably didn't have an S. But let's see. The Xiesheng series of that character has no rusheng, which if we saw a rusheng with a T, we would say, all right, that's evidence as per the second slide that I presented earlier. And it even has some pingsheng. There's no obvious phonetic component in it. It's taken to be a pictogram as a pictograph, sorry, as far as I know. But it rhymes with this character that we've already agreed is TS in a previous slide, right? But also just above this rhyme, there's also these two characters. And when I look at it and I want to remove the T of Li, this is a bit appealing to me to see that. And I wonder, maybe the Hui is a mistake and Li really has no T and it's pre-initial and Ris. This would explain the Han data. But this one you don't have on your handout because I did it last night. I look at everything in the rhyme corpus that rhymes with Li. And I'll describe it. Well, it's probably readable, but basically we see little islands that connect with Li that have a TS. So TS, we have the Gue that we've seen, we have some PS things here, some T connection here as well. And then we also have some glottal stuff, oh, okay, some and in that blue area, so we see, when we see just a pair and it's not connected, that means there was just one poem where there's a pair like this. So S and Li were rhyming together, then S and Li, B and Li, etc. So we see a lot of things that don't have TS or don't have a T at all there. This explains why in the previous graph we had that transition zone between the different components. And so it's not that simple now, because we really have a character that in some poems really rhyme with TS, and in some poem really doesn't rhyme. So what do we do? This character really has taken too much of my life now, and I would like to find a solution. So flipping the table. There is this sound change that I think is briefly talked about in the Baxter Sagart book, where ik has two main developments, it and ek, but also occasionally stays ik. and you can add an S to this entire statement. So X goes to its and X, and occasionally stays in X. This change seems to be dialectally conditioned, but the conditioning, I think, is not super clear, and the examples are too far east to make sense with the Western area from which transcription of Buddhist texts have come to us. But I will ask you to just go with me on this. Maybe then what happens is that if we had an IKS, then in some dialect or some condition, it becomes ITS before the Shījīng, which explains the rhyme in the Shījīng, stays ITS at the stage where codas fall before the S, like the KS. And so by late Han Chinese, we would have IJS with the S still present, while in the dialect that kept the IKS, the K drops later, and therefore we have IS, and when the S drops after vowel, in late High Chinese we get IH. If that is the case, then this could reconcile all of the data, because we would get some cases where the character li writes li, and in some it would write lis. And so it explains the rhyming data, both when it rhymes with TS and when it rhymes with IJS. And it also explains the transcription data where it never has an S. Right, so this is my approach there. It's difficult to know if it's correct, but I tried to find some possible cognates. So I take li to mean sharp and maybe being related to the word for cutting. And we find inconveniently some K and some T. So we find in some various tiny dialects, we find rit, ret. So here the final is uncertain, but I think changes between final T and final K are common in other languages. And then in Western Kiranti for cut, and so for cut we have clit, and for things that are related to cutting in the context of harvesting, which is probably relevant for li, because it depicts a knife that cuts some plants. So cutting grass and rice, rik. So we start seeing the K. In several Garong and Garong-lik languages, cutting either hair or grass has a krek or kriak. And this is very appealing to me, but maybe I'm biased. And if this is correct and we accepted a K in li, then maybe it also resolves what the pre-initial would be. Now looking just at the fact that in the Shījīng series, we have the word for plow, li, that is in the Pingsheng and doesn't have a coda, therefore. I would say that, oh, okay, this pixelated more than I anticipated, but I take this to possibly be two pictographs. So li, sharp, is a knife that cuts some grass, and here we don't get the same part here. And in fact, if you think of characters like Bali, the li, for Paris, the shape here is not the normal Dao, but it has, let's see, it has this shape, right? So you have, I can't write Chinese anymore. Right, so you have something like this, and for the plow. So if indeed these two characters are not related and they don't constitute a Shījīng series, then that resolves a lot of the additional problem that we have. And I didn't look for, I didn't look for cognates of the word for plow. I can't remember what I found. I think there was some re or something like this with open syllable there. Right, so I will be welcoming your suggestions on this, but now moving to the conclusions for me. Han rhymes, as we've seen, maintain a very distinct group of characters descending from TS in Old Chinese, while KS and normal S, they merge, they rhyme at random. So we can see that there had been a merge of these categories. The Han Chinese Buddhist transcription is consistent with this. So it points to the maintenance of a distinct S exclusively from syllables that were in TS. And so I would say we can reconstruct a TS from either material. And if they agree, that's even better. You know, we want to make sure that we have as much data as possible. But so I would extend the original statement that says we reconstruct TS in cases where we see some reflexes like IJS and that have a T as well in the Shījīng series or in cognates or word family. And I would say, let's also use the rhyming data for that. And finally, when information is conflicting, and I think there's just really, I only know of one other character at the moment, but I'm still investigating the matter. If we see really rhyming that points to both IJS and ITS, then maybe we can put a K in there and maybe temporarily we put a K and we investigate the location of these contacts, and we can see if there's a consistent mapping geographically with the behavior. And then paleography and cognates may help confirm this. And that is all. Thank you very much.